Frank had always been restless in the small village of Bangala, nestled in the heart of Tanzania. Every sunset that bathed the earth in a golden glow whispered promises of a life beyond the boundaries of his village, a life filled with hope, challenges, and stories waiting to be written. It was in these quiet moments, watching the shadows dance over the fields of acacia trees, that Frank dreamed of a place where possibility knew no limits. And so, one fateful morning, with nothing more than a few belongings, a faded photograph of his family, and an indomitable resolve, he set out on a journey that would alter his destiny forever. Day 1. Farewell to home. The day began with a tender farewell. As the rooster crowed at the first light, Frank embraced his mother and younger sister, both of whom fought back tears. His father, silent and stoic, pressed a worn journal into his hand, a keepsake meant to capture every emotion and every step along the road ahead. "Write your truth, son," his father had said. With a heavy heart but a determined spirit, Frank waved goodbye to the familiar paths of Bangala and began his walk toward an uncertain future. The village faded behind him, swallowed by the vastness of the earth and his dreams. Days 2 to 3. The birth of a journey. The initial days were filled with wonder and silent reflection. Frank trod along dusty trails and narrow country lanes, each step laced with the echo of his ancestors. His feet, used to the comforting earth of Bangala, now encountered hard, rocky soil that tested his resolve. Yet, with each painful step, he felt that he was shedding old limitations. Memories of childhood laughter and family gatherings reminded him of the warmth left behind, fueling both his sorrow and his desire to create a new beginning. The first light of dawn brought both brilliant skies and the chill of uncertainty. Frank pressed onward, fueled by the stories he'd heard of majestic European cities where art, opportunity, and struggle danced together in a beautiful, tragic symphony. His mind wandered to visions of bustling streets, impressive architecture, and the promise of a life replete with possibility. Though hope flickered like a fragile flame inside him, he was not naive. He knew that freedom often came at a cost, and that the road ahead would test him in ways that few could imagine. Days 4 to 6. Confronting the unknown by the 4th day, the journey began to expose its harsher side. The sun, now relentlessly beating down, seemed intent on stripping away the courage in his bones. Frank's water supply dwindled, and hunger gnawed at him like an uninvited specter. On one particularly scorching afternoon, he collapsed beside a lonely baobab tree. As he lay there, his thoughts swirled with a potent mix of fear and determination. Memories of his loved ones, their faces illuminated in the flickering glow of home, lent him strength. During these grueling days, Frank encountered those who dwelled on the fringes of the world, a motley band of fellow travelers, smugglers with hardened faces, and kind souls who offered him a morsel of food or fresh water. In the silence of his worn-out body, small moments of compassion shone like beacons. An old woman with a wrinkled smile once offered him a crust of bread, whispering, "May the winds carry you safely." Her simple words meant more to Frank than any map or guide. Day 7. The weight of betrayal. Midway through his journey, on the 7th day, Frank encountered an unexpected betrayal. He had joined a small group of travelers who, like him, were lured by the promise of a better future in Europe. For a brief while, companionship lightened his steps and shared the burden of endless miles. However, in the dim light of dusk, Frank discovered that a man he had come to trust had stolen the little money they had pooled together. The betrayal cut deep. It wasn't just the loss of coin, but the shattering of hope and trust. Despite the harsh lesson learned, Frank grieved the deception quietly. In the solitude of the night, he scribbled in his journal about the bitter taste of betrayal, wondering if the world was as unkind as it seemed. Days 8 to 10. Acts of kindness and unyielding desperation as he walked on. Solitary now, but for the occasional companion, Frank began to experience the duality of human nature in a way he had never known. On the 8th day, while traversing a barren landscape where the horizon melted into the shimmering heat, he met a young man named Elias. Elias, whose eyes sparkled with quiet determination, shared his own story of escape and of the dreams that had driven him across continents. Together, they navigated treacherous paths, pooling their dwindling resources and drawing strength from their combined hope. Elias's kindness was a salve on Frank's wounded spirit. Over campfires on chilly nights, they exchanged stories of lost loves, broken promises, and the relentless pursuit of something greater. Their conversation was punctuated by long silences filled with both sorrow and the unspoken acknowledgement of their shared struggles. On the 10th day, however, fate thrust Frank into another trial when Elias, gravely ill from exhaustion and malnutrition, succumbed to the merciless elements. The loss of his newfound friend plunged Frank into a deep well of grief. Under a starlit sky, he wept silently for Elias, for the innocents lost, and for the brutal cost of their desperate bid for freedom. Days 11 to 13. The crucible of survival after Elias's passing. Frank's heart felt heavier, and every step became a contest against despair. On the 11th day, fatigue threatened to overwhelm him. His limbs ached, his lips cracked, and every sound seemed to carry the weight of his sorrow. Yet, as if summoned by a will greater than himself, Frank pressed on. In a small oasis on the fringes of a sun-baked desert, he encountered a young mother and her 2 children who were also fleeing the suffocating grip of poverty. Their gentle smiles and simple acts of kindness, sharing water and a meal of maize porridge, awoke in him a renewed sense of purpose. Their quiet fortitude reminded him that even in the darkest times, life could bloom like a rare desert flower. The 12th day brought more than physical torment. It was an emotional crucible. As Frank trudged along dusty roads bordering precarious settlements, armed guards and cunning smugglers lurked in the shadows, ever watchful of weary travelers. Nightfall turned the world sinister, the silence punctured by distant shouts and hurried footsteps. It became clear that every mile traveled came with risks that no map could chart. In these moments, the echoes of his journal entries offered comfort, each word a testament to his resolve to live, even when every instinct urged him to surrender. On the 13th day, while the chill of pre-dawn mist clung to the landscape, Frank's inner voice roared with conflicting emotions: fear, anger, sorrow, and yet steadfast hope. The faces of those he had lost, a friend, companions, even the fragments of a once warm community, flashed before him. Their memories fueled a silent vow that the pain of his journey would not be in vain. Despite the constant threat of capture or worse, Frank knew that the promise of a better future in Europe was worth every hardship. With rugged determination, he rose and continued his march. Day 14. The precipice of destiny. By day 14, the borders that separated continents began to appear in the distance. Frank could feel the air change as he neared an unfamiliar land, a transition from the harsh, unyielding heat of his homeland to a cooler, more mysterious aura. The journey had carved deep lines of sorrow and resilience upon his face, each wrinkle a chapter in a story written with sweat and tears. Now, his body screamed in protest at every step, yet his spirit soared, buoyed by memories of kindness and the promise of rebirth. In a makeshift encampment, near a crumbling wall that marked a border, Frank huddled with other tired souls, listening to murmurs of hope and dread in equal measure. Even as exhaustion seeped into his bones, he dared to imagine life in Europe, a life where opportunities and dreams might mend the scars of betrayal and loss. Day 15. A bitter new dawn on the 15th day. As the first blush of dawn painted the sky with soft pastel hues, Frank stepped over the threshold into a land that whispered of both promise and alienation. Europe lay ahead, a vast expanse of cobblestone streets, murmuring voices in languages he could barely decipher, and the bittersweet aroma of pastries and fresh rain. Yet, amid the hopeful hustle, Frank sensed the undercurrent of hardship that haunted every corner of this new world. Bureaucratic barriers, the cold scrutiny of officials, and the silent judgment of those who saw only a foreign man in tattered clothes met him. In the chaotic blur of arrival at a busy train station, Frank felt both invisible and unbearably exposed. The promises of a better life were interwoven with cruel obstacles. The language of hope was not the language spoken here, and every interaction was tinged with the remoteness of his origins. With his journal clutched tightly in his hand, a relic of every step taken and every tear shed, Frank made his way through a maze of indifferent faces and closed doors. The journey had been a tapestry woven with threads of both exultation and despair. Frank recalled the whispered lullabies of his mother, the stern counsel of his father, and the fleeting camaraderie of Elias and the young family in the desert. Every experience had etched itself onto his heart, a constant reminder that every victory is shadowed by loss, and every joyful moment is intermingled with sorrow. A new chapter amid uncertainty in the days that followed his arrival. Frank found himself navigating an unfamiliar world with an openness tempered by caution. The neighborhoods he wandered were mosaics of culture and history. Yet behind every brightly painted facade lay hardships comparable to those he had known on his long trek. Jobs were scarce, and people who once welcomed him with a nod now measured him by his threadbare clothes and foreign accent. It was a difficult and lonely existence for the young man who had once marched from Bangala with a heart full of dreams. But even as time unraveled around him, Frank remained resolute. Every night, in a small room shared with others who, like him, had left everything behind, he wrote in his journal. The pages overflowed with memories of his arduous journey, the pain, the betrayals, the small sparks of human kindness, and the overwhelming solitude of a life lived on the margins. His writing became both a testament to the trials he had endured and a silent hymn to the hope that still clung, however tenuously, to his spirit. Frank's story soon began to attract the attention of a local community center that was dedicated to helping migrants. Volunteers there saw in him a resilience and vulnerability that spoke to the many layers of human experience. With gentle support, Frank was introduced to people who not only helped him learn the language, but also connected him with opportunities for work and education. Though progress was slow and fraught with setbacks, every small step forward served as a victory over the sorrow of his past. During this period, Frank's memories of Bangala and the long road he had walked were never far from his mind. He often recalled how, in the midst of despair, a stranger's kindness or a shared smile had rekindled his courage. Those moments became the bedrock upon which he built his tentative new life. Yet even as he embraced hope, a part of him remained tethered to the bittersweet recollection of all that had been lost on the way. Friends who never made it, moments of overwhelming grief, and the stark realization that every journey, no matter how heroic, carries with it a heavy price. Epilogue. The journey within years later, Frank would come to understand that the road he walked was not just a physical passage from one continent to another, but a journey within himself. The scars on his soul, born of betrayal, loneliness, and grief, had not diminished his capacity for wonder and kindness. Instead, they had forged him into a man who embraced the complexity of life, the beautiful interplay of joy and sorrow, hope and despair. In quiet moments, when a European rain tapped gently against his window, Frank would open his journal and read through the pages that recorded not only his hardships, but also the profound lessons learned along the way. Every word was a reminder that life, in all its messy, unpredictable glory, is a mosaic of experiences. Frank's story was one of painful farewells and hopeful beginnings, of moments that left him breathless with both anguish and exhilaration. It was a narrative written by footsteps across dusty roads, by silent exchanges of compassion, and by the quiet resilience of a young man from Bangala who dared to dream of Europe. And so, as Frank walked through the vibrant streets of his new world, he carried with him the legacy of his past, a past that was as much defined by the shadows of loss as by the light of his dreams. In the reflective depths of his eyes shone the echoes of that long 15-day trek, a journey that taught him that true courage is measured not by the absence of fear, but by the willingness to keep walking, even when every step costs the weight of sorrow and the hope of a brighter tomorrow. Frank's life in Europe was not the fairy tale he had once imagined. It was challenging, at times harsh, and brimming with obstacles. Yet, in its complexity lay the excitement of the unknown and the promise of renewal. The lessons of his journey, the importance of compassion, the transformative power of hope, and the indomitable strength of the human spirit became the compass by which he navigated each day. His story, marked by both tragedy and triumph, continues to serve as a quiet reminder to all who have been burdened by life struggles, that even in the face of sorrow, the courage to embark on a new journey can unveil beauty, resilience, and ultimately, redemption. In the end, Frank did not simply find a new life in Europe. He discovered that every path, no matter how rugged or steeped in sorrow, can lead to a place where the heart dares to dream again. The memories of Bangala, etched in the lines of his weathered journal, endured as a testament to the enduring power of hope, a beacon that would guide him, and perhaps others, through the darkest of nights toward the promise of a dawn that is as uncertain as it is beautiful. Frank's long, painful, and exhilarating journey from the village of Bangala to the bustling streets of Europe reminds us all that while life is filled wide, his story is a tribute to every step taken in the pursuit of a better tomorrow, and a reminder that the journey itself, with all its sorrows and delights, is what shapes the soul.